So March is almost over, which means it's time to wrap up, and you're going to have to forgive me. This is like the last one. I got to do it, right? But before we go, we got to get our Mooz on. So the Mooz is not strictly speaking a 3D printer. I would call this a making machine. It's got 3D printing capability. It's also got the ability to do laser engraving, and it's got a router bit on it, which is essentially just a drill on here that spins really fast, and with the right bits, you can cut wood and other materials. Now, one thing about this printer is that all of the axes, X, Y, Z, they are all the same part, and they are interchangeable with each other. You can put whichever one anywhere you want, and they will all work, and you could potentially take it apart and swap them out, and they would still work, provided that you hook them into the right place in the back in this very clever little connection system that wires it all together. And I think that that is genius. Now, once you get it all together, the first configuration I put it on was 3D printing, and this is the build plate. And if you look at this build plate and you go, oh, that is a tiny build plate. That's what I did anyways. I looked at it and I went, holy smokes, that's small. But then I compared it to my Monoprice Select Mini, and really, its build plate is no bigger or smaller than the build area of the Monoprice Select Mini. This is a mini build plate. This is a mini 3D printer. And even though it's not heated, and I would normally dock it a lot of points in my head for not being heated, the fact that it is a multiple utility machine kind of makes me want to overlook that a little bit. We'll have other things to talk about, that the heated build plate is kind of not the most important part of it. So I got it configured as a 3D printer. And the first time you put this together, a lot of people, they looked at the Kickstarter for this and they said, holy smokes, I could reconfigure it to be a Delta because Deltas are cool. No, when you put this together, you get one configuration, and I got the double Z configuration, and that was it. You didn't have to, you don't get to swap it and change it. And really, why would you want to, but you still don't get that ability. Now, I've seen some other YouTubers who tried putting this together and tried to make it work and couldn't get it to work. That was not my experience. In 30 minutes, I had this thing built together, reflashed the firmware to make sure I was on the latest version, and it was up and running, and there was no problem. And I'm super impressed by it. It's got this really cool little touchscreen interface that also just plugs right in, just like everything else, that allows you to move it around and control it all over the place just from this screen. Select the prints that you want to do and go from here. It's really very cool. And it's even magnetic, and they put a little place for it to magnet on right here in the front, which now that I realize that their Mooz logo is where the magnet is supposed to attach, this doesn't really attach anywhere else. I discovered it was magnetic actually when I hit it on another 3D printer and it stuck to the side there. But there's no place over here for this to magnet onto. It magnets over here, and yet over here is where I put the sticker of my approval for this 3D, or for this machine. Oh well, live and learn. So I got it together, 3D printer configuration, put in the spool of filament. And can I just admit how much I love these tiny little spools? This is a 200-gram spool, and man, I want to make a video in the future about why I think we should be switching to tiny spools like this. This is fantastic. So, got a little place for the filament here. I threaded it in, ran a print, printed off a decoder ring, gave it to my wife for Valentine's Day as part of a little Valentine's Day escape room challenge that I had for her, and she loved it. And then proved that it worked. And then I tried changing filament. So I heated up the nozzle, pulled out the filament, and somehow got a filament jam the very first time. You guys underestimate my ability to jam 3D printers. For some reason, filament jams are my bane. I get them all the time. And here's the thing. This is the printer head attachment. How do you clean this thing out? It's just solid. However, it's got some screws. So I unscrewed the screws, pulled this thing apart, and what did I find inside? A Mark 8, 9, 10, I'm not really sure. It's definitely a derivative from the same type of nozzle that I see on every other 3D printer. However, it's super crammed into this space. There is no space inside of here for anything else, and that makes it hard not only to get out, but to get back in. Now, I'm super impressed with their fan setup that does the blowing around the nozzle. It's got a 360-degree blower on there, so it's really a good 3D printer nozzle. My only complaint about this whole thing is the difficulty of getting into it to clean out the filament. If I were redesigning this, I would say open this up. Either allow us to just take the cover off and see it in the front, or just remove the cover, but you can't because the cover is the frame for it. And if I were inclined to, I might cut this and take it off so that I can get at it to clean things out a little bit easier. However, I don't know how inclined I am to do that, because at this point, if I need to do another 3D print, I've got other 3D printers, but I don't have engravers and routers. So am I ever really going to use this thing for 3D printing again? Maybe not. Well, I did manage to get it all back together, and I tried loading the filament, and somehow as I was loading the filament, I could hear it hitting the fan. So I was faced with either taking it all apart and trying to get it to work again, or just going on and experimenting with something else. I chose the latter option. And the next head that I put in there was the engraver head. Now, the engraver head has a little diode, which I think is an 8-watt diode. Not strong enough to cut wood or acrylic, but strong enough to etch it. Now, part of the problem with this machine is it didn't come with any material or projects for me to work on inherently. And I think that they probably should have included in the box 5 or 6 different projects to play with the different technologies that they have, maybe even something that mixed the technologies. And yet, even on their website, this is created by a company called Dobot, I haven't seen any of that. There's no, suggestions of what to do with this machine, so I had to come up with it on my own, and I had to source my own material for it. And having never done engraving before, I wasn't really sure what to do. So I had the bright idea. I got myself some 1x1 wood, and my thought was that I would use the engraving to make a set of building blocks. Children's toy building block, custom building blocks. And so I started playing with it. And the first thing I did was I took my 3D printing logo and I put it on this side. And I had the engraver on just a little bit too hot, and it scorched this, and the details are crap, and it was off-center. Okay, I'm clearly still learning. So I tried it again, adjusted the settings on this side, and something weird happened on this side. The wood, this wood is not consistent in its type, and so consequently, some parts of it engraved well, and some parts of it didn't. It's like it hit a knot with the engraving. I didn't even know that was possible. Now, the software seems to indicate that we can do grayscale, that we can do multiple degrees of engraving. So I tried that. I pulled up a picture of Simon and tried to engrave that on there, and it really only the black came through. I tried it again. I think that was this side. Completely worthless. Can't even see it. So I realized that there's a relationship between the material that you're using and the settings that you're using on the material. This should have been obvious to me, but it was still something I had to learn. I tried it again with a picture of my face. This was the best I was able to get out of it, and it's not that good, but there are some indications of grayscale in there, so it might be possible to do this, but it's going to require some better controlled material than cheap lumber that I bought at the hardware store. I'm going to have to get something that is of a more consistent quality, and I don't know where to get that. Okay, so I've had fun with the engraver, and I should mention, this engraver is really really bright. Like using it was like blah, 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 as you watch it move around and light up stuff. So do not stare directly into the beam. It is really, really bright. Now, as to why the print bed is covered in aluminum foil, once I got the engraver set up, I, played with it and got it set up and started to do some engraving, but I missed the material, and this 8-watt laser scorched and cut a hole in the print bed. Now, this is the way the manual says to do it. You're supposed to double stick tape the material on the print bed and use that, and the engraver tore up the print bed. Now, in retrospect, I maybe should have switched over to this other bed that they have for the engraving that will hold your material in place. But my solution at the time was just to cover this with aluminum foil because the laser can't cut through the aluminum foil, and so that protected my bed. And since I'm not really using it for 3D printing anymore, maybe I will just leave it like that for a little while. So last one I needed to do, the little drill bit on here that spins around and you use it to cut out wood or other materials. Now, I could not find anywhere in the package for this thing any drill bits, any engraving bits. There was nothing on there. I searched around. I don't think they sent me one, or if they did... Oh, is that what this is with the plastic? I literally, just now, as we were recording this, realized that these are the bits. So, I'm the idiot, and I will be able to play with this after this video. Instead, what I did was I pulled out my hand router, and I pulled out a bit for it, and I decided to try cutting the wood with that. Got it all set up. You have to home the head, put it where you want to do, and you do the same thing for the engraving. You manually move the head to where it needs to be, lower it down, that's down, and then you have to hit the 0 button on here to tell the machine that this is the 0 point for this particular piece of wood, and it will go from there, which is interesting, but that's how you overcome the differences in the heights that you might have as well as anything else, and that's the way like real life routers work. The one complaint that I have is that the difference of the icons between we are zeroing now to go back to 0 isn't really clear. They both have a 0 on them, and one zero's around it and one zero's at it. It's really easy to get those two confused. It's a non-language specific icon, I get that, but it's confusing. So I lined it all up, I got the material wedged in there, I flipped out the heated bed, or the non-heated bed, the print bed, for the one that can just hold stuff in place. I put the piece of, they did send me one piece of wood, and I put it in here, and I tried routing it out with my bit, and after letting it go for a little while, well, yeah, it didn't work. I think that this was just the wrong bit for this, and I went to the store to buy some more bits to see if I can try it out, and I couldn't find any at Harbor Freight, so I was going to go to Home Depot today, but it turns out a doy, so I will be putting these in. Man, I thought that these were probes of some sort, and that the plastic around them was just so that my fingers could have something to hold on to. Man, I am dumb. All right. So engraving might still work, and the machine works for all the things that it does. The pattern, by the way, that I found for engraving, I found by searching online for grayscale depth images, and I've learned a lot about grayscale depth images. This particular one is of a dragon. Now, the thing about grayscale depth images is they're two-dimensional in the sense that you can only go in and out. There's nothing hiding underneath, no overhangs and stuff like that, so they're really good for routing where you're coming in from above. But we could 3D print these. There's no reason why we couldn't. In fact, Cura, all you got to do is take the picture, drop it in Cura, and it will turn it into a bump map for you. You can use this to make lithophanes, and it's super cool that they do it, but if you do it where white is higher, it does exactly what I was going to do with this piece of wood. So experimentally, I decided to 3D print out this model that I did. And I 3D printed it twice. This first one was 3D printed laying down with the layers going through like this, but I noticed that the router is going sideways across it. And in a lot of ways, that might be a better way to get some depth and detail because you're turning everything into stacked curves like this. So while I printed this one laying down at a super high resolution, as high as my printer would go, I printed this one standing up, and I had to make the base a little bit thicker, but otherwise I was able to stand this up and get a print from it that looked rather good at a slightly more relaxed resolution. Honestly, I'm impressed at how well this one did, but without a doubt, standing up to print it was a little bit better. And the router does the same exact thing. It goes side to side. So I can't wait until I'm done routing this to compare 3D printing versus routing on this. But the truth is, all right, can I be serious here about this? Can I be honest about this machine? I like it. I'm super impressed that it exists. But it's really hard to switch configurations. It's really hard to change the head. It's not really hard. It's 4 screws that you got to unscrew and rescrew after you turn it on and use the jog head to move it to the middle so you can get at the screws. Like, why didn't they come up with a system that was faster and easier to swap things out? Why am I having to screw and unscrew these bolts every time I want to change the head? It makes me not want to change the head. It makes me want to turn this 3-in-1 machine into a 1-in-1 machine. Just choose one of them. And since the laser engraving just basically, you know, scratches the surface with burning, I guess I'm going to keep this as a mini router. But then even as a mini router, it's so mini that it kind of loses the advantage of being a router. Yeah, I can do these tiny little things, but I can 3D print these tiny little things. I want a router so I can take a large piece of wood and cut it out and have a job done in an hour that a 3D printer would take a year or never be able to do because it just doesn't have the volume. If I wanted to cut a arcade cabinet, I'm not going to make that in a 3D printer, even a large-scale 3D printer, because if I want a full standing one, how many pieces? That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. We're not going to do that. And yet this is so small that I can't use it for that either. It's basically just a subtractive mini 3D printer. I like this machine, but I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I'm having a hard time justifying the use of it. So I guess really I'm going to go to you and say, if you had this machine that can do laser engraving, routing, or 3D printing, though I'll do that on a separate machine, can you think of anything that you would do if you could do multiple disciplines on a single machine that can really only produce things of this size? I guess I could use it for doing circuit boards. I could get some circuit board sheets and cut them down to size and then route out some circuit boards. I guess that's a possibility, and I think that I definitely want to explore that in the future. And so I'm excited to have it for that reason. But besides that, I got nothing. What you got? Help me out with this one. Leave a comment in the description or leave a comment below, as well as anything else you want to say. It's a cool machine, and for me, it worked. I know for others it hasn't, but for me, it worked, and it works. And I'm going to try to figure out something to do with this. I'm going to try, because I think it deserves the effort. Dobot did a good job with this one. I think that Dobot could do a better job, though, of giving people a reason to have it. I think that they could post projects on their site and encourage people to get their machine so that they can do these projects. I don't think that this machine is bad. I think that it suffered from a couple of decisions, like not being able to rapidly swap out these heads and bad marketing. I think that this could be a very good machine. We just need somebody to find that killer app for it to make it worth having. And then we're going to have a good time with this machine. We're going to figure out all sorts of really cool things to do with it because it is capable of all sorts of things. And so despite the fact that I don't know what I'm looking forward to, I'm looking forward to it. As always, I want to thank you very much for sticking with me to this point, and thank you very much for sticking with me throughout the month of March as I worked on this and got it all cleaned up. This has been a really good time for me. I hope it's been a good time for you. It's been great to hear from all of you guys, and I will have more to say on that in the next video as we wrap this all up. So I will stop here and say thank you very much to my Patreon backers. Your support means more to me than ever right now. Thank you very much for watching. Remember, safety first. See you next time.
Do you want to know more about 3D printing but don't know where to start? Or did you buy a 3D printer but you need some help getting it going? Don't panic. The Beginner's Guide to the 3D Printing Galaxy is here, now, for you. Buy it on Amazon.